Welcome, my friend. I invite you to settle in, make yourself comfortable, and let your mind drift. Tonight, we are going to wander back in time, far across the seas and centuries, to the world of the Vikings. But instead of raids, battles, or the clang of swords, tonight's story will take us into something softer, calmer, and far more overlooked: the way the Vikings slept. Because while their lives were often hard, cold, and demanding, their rest, their sleep, was surprisingly well crafted. And in many ways, it might have been better than ours today. So, close your eyes if you wish, and imagine yourself standing in the dim light of a Viking longhouse. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, dried fish, and wool. The roof is high, sloping, made of timber beams, turf, and thatch. It blocks the fierce northern winds outside, leaving only a soft draft moving through the cracks. In here, life slows, and day turns to night. People settle in, not with glowing screens, buzzing lights, or alarms, but with firelight, fading embers, and the rhythm of nature itself. The Vikings, you see, lived in tune with their environment. Their sleep, like their waking hours, followed the seasons of the north. In summer, when the sun barely dipped below the horizon, they adjusted to long evenings and glowing twilight. In winter, when darkness stretched endlessly, they rested often, broken into long intervals of slumber. Their bodies aligned with the land around them, and their sense of time was different from ours. Instead of rigid hours on a clock, they measured their days by the sun, the stars, and the cycle of tasks to be done. But let us walk deeper into the longhouse. Along the walls are raised wooden platforms. These are the sleeping benches. Some are wide enough for whole families to curl up together, while others are smaller, for one or two. Over these benches lie piles of bedding. Furs from reindeer, bears, or wolves, woven woolen blankets, and sometimes even feathers. For people who lived much of their days in the biting cold, these sleeping arrangements were warm, thick, and insulating. A Viking would lie down, wrapped in heavy layers, surrounded by warmth, with the glow of the hearth at the center of the room flickering through the shadows. And the hearth, that was everything. It was the heart of the Viking home. By day, it provided fire for cooking, heat for survival, and a gathering place for stories. By night, it dimmed into embers, sending up the last wisps of smoke into the rafters. The fire offered a kind of gentle nightlight, a glow that shifted across the wooden beams and the walls. Children would fall asleep watching sparks rise, and adults would doze off knowing that warmth lingered through the night. Imagine lying there, the crackle of wood softening into silence, and the cold world outside held at bay by the strength of timber, turf, and fire. Unlike today, where many of us sleep alone in separate rooms, Vikings often slept communally. Families huddle. Settle in once again, my friend. Tonight, we return to the Viking longhouse, not to watch their beds or their furs this time, but to wander deeper into what happened once their eyes were closed. For sleep, in the Viking world, was more than rest. It was a bridge. A bridge between day and night, between the known and the unknown, between the world of the living and the realm of the unseen. When the fire dimmed, when breath slowed, and when the longhouse grew quiet, the Vikings believed that dreams began to carry meaning. Not just random flickers of the mind, but true visions, signs, and warnings. To them, the night was not an empty space. It was alive with messages from gods, ancestors, and forces of nature. Imagine it with me now. The longhouse is still. Outside, the northern winds whistle through the darkness. Inside, you hear the hush of sleeping bodies. Somewhere near the hearth, an elder shifts in their sleep. Their lips move faintly. They are dreaming. And in that dream, perhaps, they walk again upon the deck of a longship, waves crashing, the spray of salt on their face. Or perhaps they see something stranger, a wolf with glowing eyes, a raven circling high above. In the Viking mind, such images were not dismissed. They were studied, remembered, told aloud in the morning. For dreams could shape choices. If a warrior dreamed of victory, it gave him confidence. If a mother dreamed of ill omens, she warned her children. If a farmer dreamed of storms, he might prepare his fields differently. In a world where nature ruled all, sleep became a place to seek guidance. And so, the Vikings carried with them stories of dreams. There are tales in their sagas of dream women, spirits who appeared in the night, whispering truths of battles yet to come. Some claim that Odin himself, the All-Father, sent visions in dreams, guiding warriors toward or away from their fate. To sleep, then, was not only to rest, but to open oneself to the will of gods and destiny. But the night held more than dreams. It also held rituals. Some Viking households, before settling to sleep, burned herbs, juniper, mugwort, or birch, believing the smoke carried protection. A seer might place charms near the bedding, carved with runes of safe passage. Mothers might murmur protective verses over their children as they drifted into slumber. To sleep was to grow vulnerable, and so small acts of care helped guard against both sickness and spirits. Think of the sounds of such a night, the soft whisper of prayers, the faint crackle of herbs in the fire, the rhythmic hush of people curling under blankets. Then, silence, save for the storm outside, or the howl of a distant wolf. In that silence, the Vikings let themselves drift, wrapped not only in furs but in beliefs that carried them safely through the dark hours. There was also the matter of the soul. The Vikings believed that a person's soul might wander in dreams. Some thought it left the body, flying across landscapes, visiting Misty. The night has passed, my friend, and the fire in the longhouse is low. Slowly, the darkness begins to shift. Not with the sound of alarms or the glare of sudden lights, but with the natural rhythm of the earth. The Viking household wakes not by force, but by quiet necessity. The roosters crow, the livestock stir, and faint gray light seeps through the wooden slats of the longhouse. It is morning in the Viking world. Imagine lying there beneath heavy furs. The warmth still clings to your body, the scent of wool and smoke surrounds you. Outside, the air is cool, and inside, the embers of the fire crackle faintly. One by one, people begin to shift. A child rubs their eyes. An elder coughs softly. Somewhere near the doorway, a dog stretches, tail thumping lazily against the floorboards. This is how the day begins, not in haste, but in the quiet rhythm of a household rising together. For the Vikings, mornings were practical but never rushed. There was no need to shave minutes from sleep to race into a rigid schedule. Instead, the day unfolded with the needs of life. First, the fire. Always the fire. Someone, perhaps a mother, perhaps a child, would poke the ashes, add kindling, and coax the coals back into flame. The warmth spread again through the hall, light dancing along the walls and beams. The longhouse, once a dark cave, came alive with glow and breath. Water was fetched, often from a nearby stream or well. The morning air was crisp, the ground damp with dew. Vikings splashed their faces, washed their hands, and refreshed themselves in the chill. For those who worked the fields, the cool water helped wake them, a natural start to the labor that awaited. For sailors, it was a cleansing ritual before heading to the shore. Cleanliness, though simple, mattered to the Vikings. Combs, washing, and grooming were part of daily routine. Breakfast, too, was different from ours. There were no hurried cups of coffee, no packaged foods. Instead, meals were steady and hearty, meant to fuel long hours of work. A bowl of porridge, made from barley or oats, simmered on the hearth. Bread, baked days before, was sliced and shared. Butter, cheese, or dried fish might accompany it. Sometimes milk, sometimes ale, sometimes simply water drawn fresh from the well. It was not lavish, but it was nourishing. As people ate, they talked softly, sharing their dreams, their plans, or simply the quiet of morning. And dreams, yes, they were spoken aloud. What had been seen in sleep was remembered in waking. An elder might retell a vision of wolves running across the fields, warning that travelers should be cautious. A child might say they dreamed of the sea, and parents would nod knowingly, thinking of journeys ahead. Dreams carried weight, and mornings were when their meaning was unfolded. In this way, the Viking day began not only with food and fire, but with reflection on the mysterious world of sleep. Once the meal was done, tasks divided. The farmer gathered tools, ready. The day has ended, my friend. The fields are quiet, the tools put away, the animals settled for the night. The air grows cooler, and the sun slips low across the horizon, painting the sky in long streaks of red and gold. This is evening in the Viking world, and it is a time not of rush, but of gentle gathering. Imagine a longhouse at dusk. The smoke from the hearth rises through the roof, curling against the twilight sky. Families step inside, brushing dirt from their boots, shaking off the chill of the air. The great wooden door closes behind them, and within, the world softens into the warm glow of fire. Outside, the wind sighs, but inside, the longhouse hums with the sounds of life. The evening meal begins. It is not a feast, but a steady supper, shared among all who belong to the household. A pot of stew, made from what the day has offered, barley, cabbage, fish, or meat if luck has been kind. Flatbread is passed around, torn in pieces by hand. Butter, cheese, or dried fruits might be shared, and ale or mead poured sparingly into wooden cups. Each person eats slowly, together, with quiet talk rising and falling like the crackle of the fire. For the Vikings, supper was not just food. It was community. The day's labor was done, and now came the chance to sit, to rest, to share the fruits of work. A father might speak of the fields, of how the crops grew. A sailor might speak of the tides, of the winds and the shore. Children listened, wide-eyed, nibbling their bread, as stories of the day flowed across the firelight. When the bowls were empty, when the last crust of bread was eaten, the longhouse settled deeper into evening. Tools were mended, clothes were patched, wool was spun. Women worked quietly with their hands, shaping what would be needed for tomorrow. Men sharpened blades or carved wood into tools. Children played softly, rolling small carved toys across the floor. All of it was done in the dimming light, the hearth at the center glowing like a heart that pulsed warmth into every corner. But evening held more than work. It held stories. Always, the Vikings loved stories. As shadows deepened and hands grew tired, voices took over. An elder leaned forward, his beard glowing orange in the firelight, and began to tell. Perhaps a saga of the gods, Odin wandering the world in disguise, Thor raising his hammer against the giants, Freya riding her chariot drawn by cats. Or perhaps a tale of heroes, Sigurd slaying the dragon, or a local warrior whose deeds lived on in memory. Children curled closer to their parents, eyes heavy but listening, while the flames flickered across the faces of all. Songs, too, filled the longhouse. Deep voices sang verses passed down through generations, while others joined in, the rhythms carrying across the hall. Some songs were loud and proud, celebrating victories. Others were soft, almost like lullabies, meant to ease the heart after a long day. The tones of the lyre or the gentle beat of a drum might join. When the longhouse finally settled into silence, a different kind of life began. The day was full of movement, tools scraping, voices rising, children tumbling, animals shuffling, and the evening was filled with warmth, food, and stories. But when the last ember in the hearth glowed low and the voices fell away, the Viking world entered into a night that was both vulnerable and strangely peaceful. In those hours after the final stories had ended and the children had been tucked against their mothers' sides, the longhouse breathed like a single body. The timbers creaked as though sighing from the weight of years, the smoke from the hearth drifted slowly through the rafters, and outside the walls, the northern wind wrapped itself around the building as if trying to pry its way inside. The Vikings were not strangers to fear of the night. Their stories were full of the kinds of beings that thrived in the dark. Spirits that whispered in the forests, Draugr, the restless dead, trolls that prowled the mountains. Yet, despite these fears, they knew rest was necessary. For a Viking, the body was as much a weapon as any axe or spear, and that body demanded sleep. And so, beneath their heavy wool blankets and their layers of fur, they surrendered to it. A longhouse at midnight was never entirely quiet. Sleep in those days was communal, not solitary. Entire families, sometimes whole clans, shared the same great hall. They slept on wooden benches that lined the walls, or on low bedding stuffed with straw, covered in animal pelts for warmth. Men, women, children, dogs, even the occasional lamb or goat, it was not unusual for all to find warmth together. In that closeness, sound carried. You could hear the soft crackle of the dying fire, the occasional pop of sap from a log not quite burned through. Someone might turn in their bedding, the rustle of wool filling the space. A child could stir, mumble half a dream, then nestle closer against a parent. Somewhere in the corner, a dog would sigh and stretch its paws. And always, there was snoring, deep, rumbling, uneven, as constant as the wind outside. To live in such closeness was to live without privacy, and so the sounds of the body were accepted. No one was embarrassed by snores, coughs, or restless legs. It was part of life. It was part of the rhythm of night, as steady as waves against a shore. Yet, there was another side to Viking sleep that fascinates historians today. It is believed that many early peoples, Vikings included, did not always sleep in a single, unbroken stretch. Instead, they may have followed what is called first sleep and second sleep. After several hours of deep slumber, some would stir in the night, wake briefly, perhaps tend to the fire, whisper to a neighbor, or even step outside to relieve themselves under the stars. These interludes were natural, a pause between two halves of rest. After a little while, they would return to their bedding, drifting again into dreams. Imagine now. The longhouse is silent now, or nearly silent. The laughter that once rang beneath the rafters has faded into whispers, and even the whispers have settled into stillness. The hearth, once bright with leaping flames, has burned down to a bed of glowing embers. A faint orange light pulses with each shift of the coals, casting soft shadows on the curved wooden beams above. This is the heart of the Viking night. Not the lively twilight when tales are told, nor the drowsy warmth of families wrapping themselves in furs. This is the stillness that comes when even the fire itself seems ready to rest. Outside, the wind may sweep across the snow, or rain may rattle against the longhouse walls, but inside there is only a deep, hushed calm. The people sleep close together. On wooden benches, on heaps of straw and moss, under blankets of wool and hides. Children breathe in tiny, uneven sighs. Farmers, who rose before the sun, now sink into the slow rhythm of dreams. The warriors, who spent the day sharpening blades or hauling timber, lie still with their weapons at their sides. Even their rough hands, scarred from battle and labor alike, are softened in rest. The longhouse itself seems alive. The beams creak faintly as the cold outside presses against the warm air within. Smoke drifts upward, lingering near the roof hole where the night sky glimmers faintly through. Sometimes a spark jumps from the hearth and fizzles against the stones, reminder that even in stillness, there is movement. The scent of wood smoke mingles with that of wool, leather, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs hum along the beams to ward off spirits. And there, in this deep night, the rhythm of sleep follows its own path. The Vikings, like many before the age of clocks and electric lamps, often slept in two parts. What later scholars would call first sleep and second sleep. The first, a deep, heavy slumber that begins soon after nightfall. Then a stirring, sometime in the middle of the night, when bodies turn and minds drift between dream and waking. And then, once more, a settling into second sleep, to carry them into the dawn. Now, in the middle of this longhouse night, some stir. A farmer shifts and sits up on his bench, rubbing his eyes. He glances at the embers, checks that no flame has died completely. For him, this time is neither strange nor troubling. It is a natural pause, a moment to tend to the hearth, to breathe the cool night air that seeps in through the roof beams. Sometimes he may whisper a quiet prayer to the household gods, or murmur a blessing for his cattle sleeping in the byre outside. Then, satisfied, he lies back down and allows sleep to take him again. Across the hall, an elder's eyes open. His dreams were vivid. He may share them in the morning, for dreams carry meaning in this world. But for now, he sits quietly, listening. He hears the steady breathing of his kin. He hears the low crackle of the fire. He hears the longhouse sigh, as though it too. It is the middle of winter now, and the longhouse stands like a patient sentinel against the endless snow. Outside, the wind howls across the empty fields, tugging at the wooden beams and rattling at the doors. The sky is dark for most of the day, and night seems to stretch into eternity. The longhouse itself becomes more than a shelter, it becomes a world in miniature, a place where men, women, children, animals, memories, and dreams are pressed together under one heavy roof. Inside, the air is thick with warmth and smoke. The hearth at the center has burned low, leaving only red embers and the occasional snap of wood. The heat rises in slow waves, enough to keep the frost from creeping too close, but not enough to banish the cold completely. In the far corners of the hall, breath still steams in the air, curling above the sleeping forms before vanishing into the shadows of the rafters. Viking life in winter was one of patience. There was little to do but wait, and waiting meant long nights of sleep. Sleep was not taken all at once, but in intervals. The people of the longhouse often slipped into the first deep sleep soon after supper. Wrapped in cloaks and furs, they drifted quickly into slumber, their exhaustion pulling them down with ease. The farmers, who had worked even in the biting cold, welcomed this first sleep like an old friend. Children, worn out from play or from helping with chores, collapsed into it without resistance. Even the animals, the goats and sheep penned inside the hall for warmth, lay down and dozed with steady, rhythmic breaths. The first sleep was deep and heavy. It filled the body with a kind of stillness, a shutting down of all senses. But after some hours, many awoke naturally. They stirred, not because of noise or hunger, but because this was the rhythm of their bodies and their way of life. This waking period in the middle of the night was not unwelcome. In fact, it was often cherished. It was a time to think, to dream while half awake, to whisper quietly, to mend tools, or even to pray. The Vikings believed that dreams carried meaning, and the time between first and second sleep was when the boundary between the human world and the unseen was thinnest. An elder might wake and sit by the embers, murmuring about a dream of a journey across water. A mother might rise and soothe her child, tucking them more securely under the furs. A man might sharpen his seeks or adjust the straps on his boots. All of this was done in near silence, broken only by the faint crackle of the hearth and the sighing of the wind outside. It was not noisy, it was not restless, it was simply life's quiet continuation. During these hours, some found time for prayer. Though the old gods of the north were honored, many still held small private rituals. A sprig of juniper thrown into the embers, a whispered word to Thor for strength, a silent plea to Freya for health and love. Others took the moment to tell a story to a child who had woken. The night has passed, and now a new day begins. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the darkness inside the Viking longhouse begins to change. The heavy blackness that filled the corners all night long softens into something gentler, as if the timbers themselves are stretching awake. A faint glow pushes its way through cracks in the wooden walls, and the smoke hole above the hearth shows the first suggestion of pale morning light. For a while, nothing stirs. The longhouse still breathes like a great animal at rest, its people cocooned in layers of wool, fur, and hay. But then, very softly, the sounds of waking life begin. Someone coughs faintly from one side of the house. Another shifts under a blanket. A child sighs in her sleep. These are small signs, but they ripple across the space, breaking the silence in tender waves. At the center of it all lies the hearth. Its fire has nearly gone out, leaving only glowing embers buried beneath a thin crust of ash. The woman tasked with keeping it alive, often the oldest or most responsible member of the household, now rises quietly, careful not to wake the others. She bends low, pushing aside a piece of wood that had fallen in the night, and cups her hands around the hidden glow. With practiced patience, she blows gently, coaxing the embers into life. A faint orange spark appears. Then another. Soon, a thread of smoke curls upward, and the tiniest flicker of flame is born again. She feeds it with dry twigs and shaved bark until the hearth crackles softly. The light grows warmer, bouncing off the smoke-darkened beams overhead. Shadows retreat, and faces slowly emerge from the darkness. Some still rest, curled into themselves for a few more moments of warmth, while others stretch and yawn. The longhouse is waking. One by one, the men and women stir. A farmer named Olaf pulls himself from his bedding, brushing straw from his beard, and reaches for his boots. The air inside is cold. Colder still outside, though he will go there soon enough. He grunts softly, rubbing at his shoulders, stiff from the long night. Beside him, his wife adjusts the fur blanket over their youngest child, who murmurs something dreamlike before rolling onto her side. Children are the slowest to rise. They cling to warmth, hiding beneath cloaks or sheepskins, reluctant to face the morning chill. But mothers are firm, pulling them gently upright and handing them wooden cups of warm broth ladled from a pot suspended above the rekindled fire. The steam curls upward, filling the room with the faint smell of last night's stew, now watered down for breakfast. Outside, the first cockerel crows. Its cry carries through the misty air and seeps into the longhouse like a summons. Bjorn, the herdsman, hears it and knows what it means. He pulls on his thick woolen cloak, fastens it with a bronze brooch, and takes a deep breath before stepping into the dawn. The air is sharp and cold, his breath a white cloud before his face. Frost coats the grow. The night has passed, and now a new day begins. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the darkness inside the Viking longhouse begins to change. The heavy blackness that filled the corners all night long softens into something gentler, as if the timbers themselves are stretching awake. A faint glow pushes its way through cracks in the wooden walls, and the smoke hole above the hearth shows the first suggestion of pale morning light. For a while, nothing stirs. The longhouse still breathes like a great animal at rest, its people cocooned in layers of wool, fur, and hay. But then, very softly, the sounds of waking life begin. Someone coughs faintly from one side of the house. Another shifts under a blanket. A child sighs in her sleep. These are small signs, but they ripple across the space, breaking the silence in tender waves. At the center of it all lies the hearth. Its fire has nearly gone out, leaving only glowing embers buried beneath a thin crust of ash. The woman tasked with keeping it alive, often the oldest or most responsible member of the household, now rises quietly, careful not to wake the others. She bends low, pushing aside a piece of wood that had fallen in the night, and cups her hands around the hidden glow. With practiced patience, she blows gently, coaxing the embers into life. A faint orange spark appears. Then another. Soon, a thread of smoke curls upward, and the tiniest flicker of flame is born again. She feeds it with dry twigs and shaved bark until the hearth crackles softly. The light grows warmer, bouncing off the smoke-darkened beams overhead. Shadows retreat, and faces slowly emerge from the darkness. Some still rest, curled into themselves for a few more moments of warmth, while others stretch and yawn. The longhouse is waking. One by one, the men and women stir. A farmer named Olaf pulls himself from his bedding, brushing straw from his beard, and reaches for his boots. The air inside is cold. Colder still outside, though he will go there soon enough. He grunts softly, rubbing at his shoulders, stiff from the long night. Beside him, his wife adjusts the fur blanket over their youngest child, who murmurs something dreamlike before rolling onto her side. Children are the slowest to rise. They cling to warmth, hiding beneath cloaks or sheepskins, reluctant to face the morning chill. But mothers are firm, pulling them gently upright and handing them wooden cups of warm broth ladled from a pot suspended above the rekindled fire. The steam curls upward, filling the room with the faint smell of last night's stew, now watered down for breakfast. Outside, the first cockerel crows. Its cry carries through the misty air and seeps into the longhouse like a summons. Bjorn, the herdsman, hears it and knows what it means. He pulls on his thick woolen cloak, fastens it with a bronze brooch, and takes a deep breath before stepping into the dawn. The air is sharp and cold, his breath a white cloud before his face. Frost coats the grow. When we think about the Vikings, we usually imagine their longships slicing through the waves, their weapons flashing in battle, or their wild feasts filled with mead and song. But behind the drama of raids and sagas, there was another world, a quieter, slower rhythm of life that took place after the simple act of waking from sleep. And it is in this ordinary world that we can discover so much about what it meant to live in a Viking household. Picture a Viking longhouse in the pale northern morning. The heavy roof, made from timber and turf, still carries the cool dampness of the night. The air inside is thick with the scent of smoke and wool, mixed with the lingering warmth of bodies that had slept close together on shared bedding. Outside, the first frost still clings to the grass. Inside, the soft crackle of the hearth is slowly returning, as someone carefully stirs the embers awake. This is the world the Vikings stepped into each day. Far from the storms of battle, yet filled with its own routines, rituals, and struggles. The longhouse was the heart of Viking life. After a night of rest, everyone, men, women, children, and even the animals, would slowly begin their day within its walls. The architecture of these homes shaped how the mornings unfolded. They were long, narrow buildings, often up to 30 meters in length, with the fire burning at the center and raised platforms along the sides for sleeping. Privacy was rare. Families, servants, and sometimes guests all slept together in the same space. The fire at the center was the anchor of the home, and after waking, the first duty was always to coax it back to life. Without the fire, there was no heat, no cooked food, no light to begin the work of the day. A woman of the household, often the mistress or elder, typically held this task. She would kneel by the hearth, her hands practiced in the motion of blowing softly at the faint red glow buried under ashes. With dried moss or shavings of wood, she teased the flames back into being. The rest of the household stirred slowly to the sound of firewood crackling. The longhouse shifted from silence to quiet activity. People stretched their stiff limbs, brushed straw from their hair and clothes, and began preparing for the tasks ahead. Food was the second great concern after fire. Viking breakfasts were simple but filling, meant to fuel the long hours of labor that followed. A pot of porridge, thick and steaming, was often the first meal. It might be made from barley, oats, or rye, depending on the season and the stores of grain. Sometimes dried berries or honey sweetened the dish. On leaner days, it was plain, served with only a little milk or butter if the household had cows or goats. Bread, dark and heavy, was also common, baked in flat rounds that could be stored for days. The children gathered eagerly, their small wooden bowls outstretched. Eating together by the hearth was a moment of calm before the work divided them all. Once fed, the hoe